It may have been a while since you saw your first rig, but those impressions are hard to forget. Its sheer size, everything on the floor in motion, and you couldn't tell one piece of equipment from another. The center of activity on the rig floor is the rotating and traveling equipment, the rotary, blocks, and swivel. The following series of programs will explain the function, workings, and maintenance of rotaries, blocks, and swivels, with an eye to longer equipment life and increased personnel safety on the rig. The swivel is a rather remarkable piece of equipment. When rotary drilling first began around 1900, there was no precedent for a machine which could do all the tasks they wanted this piece to do. It had to support the whole weight of the drill string. A working load now measured anywhere from 140 tons for small rigs up to 650 tons for today's larger rigs and deeper wells. But strength alone wasn't enough. The swivel also has to permit the drill string to rotate, while affording a pressure-tight seal and passageway for drilling mud to be pumped down inside the drill string. To understand how one piece of equipment can fulfill all these functions at the same time, let's take a swivel down from the rig and look at it in the factory. Now, if it's cut apart, we can see how it's constructed. At the top of the swivel is the bale, which works just like the handle on a bucket, but carries a lot more weight. Its dimensions at the top and in the bend area both meet API standards to make sure the swivel will have the necessary strength and the correct size to form a close, safe fit with the hook it attaches to. A second area where a close, tight fit is essential for safety and strength is here at the bale eyes, where the bale attaches to the swivel. In this design, the bale is connected by bale pins. The eye of the bale and both of the bore holes in the body of the swivel where the pin fits are bored to a precise tolerance so that when you attach the bale to the swivel body, you get the proper fit. As the arrows show here, the bale pins are sandwiched on both sides by the body of the swivel. This is called double shear construction. As you can see on this mock-up, double shear provides extra strength by distributing any stress or pressure on the bale pin evenly. This means when force is applied, the double shear pin doesn't snap like a single shear pin would. The pins are replaceable, but to prevent unnecessary wear between the pin and the eye of the bale, you should grease the bale pins once each tower. Otherwise, rust and corrosion will build up inside the eye. And then, when the time comes to get that pin out, you're going to have a devil of a time doing it. continues the process of breaking down the swivel into its component parts, the next assembly is one you'll need to know real well: the wash pipe and packing. Mud, under lots of pressure from the pump, flows through the hollow central core of this wash pipe. It'll also try to force its way back up inside the housing unless your packing stops it. The purpose of the wash pipe and packing assembly is to form a leak-proof, pressure-tight seal between this rotating sleeve and this non-rotating wash pipe. Let's see how it works. In this packing arrangement, there are 4 black composition packing rings that prevent the mud from forcing its way up into the housing, or out here between the metal spacer ring, painted white, and the sleeve. Each packing ring performs independently, so that this first one, closest to the swivel body, forms a complete pressure-tight seal until it wears out. Then the second one takes over, and so on until the third and fourth ones are also worn out. At this time, the entire wash pipe and packing assembly is removed and the worn-out components are replaced. The first thing you'll need is a clean spot to lay out all your new parts and the instruction sheet. Then take a rag and wipe off any dirt and grease that may have accumulated on the old parts. Some of the spacer rings may still be in good shape, so if you don't see any nicks, burrs, or washouts, and if the grooves which hold your packing rings aren't worn, set the good metal spacers aside and reuse them in your new assembly. The packing rings must fit snug in the spacers. Let's start with the lower packing. Remember, this lower assembly will be put together upside down. That means this first metal spacer ring, identified by the hole for the grease fitting, will turn out to be the top packing spacer when the whole thing is finally assembled. Before you do anything else, make sure there's a light film of oil, not grease, on the housing, packing ring, and the metal spacer. Then make sure the grease holes are lined up before you gently tap the spacer into place. Next, insert the grease fitting before you put any of the other spacer rings into the housing. The next 2 spacer rings are interchangeable. The last spacer ring can be identified by this flattened area on the outside. It should be lined up with the tapped hole in the gland housing so that you can install a set screw with this Allen wrench to keep the packing assembly from falling out of the housing. To make sure the set screw is correctly installed, screw it in until it touches the packing spacer, then back off a 1/4 of a turn. The next to last step before the bottom half of the packing assembly is complete is to install the O-ring. It should be clean and coated with a light film of grease after it's installed. When you have hand-packed the cavities between the spacers and then wiped off any excess grease, it should look like this. Now you're ready for the upper packing, which consists of only 1 metal spacer and packing ring, which Carl is holding. It can be identified by the lugs, which fit into the matching slots on the top of the wash pipe itself. Turn the wash pipe upside down and align the lugs on the metal spacer with the slots in the wash pipe. When the spacer has been carefully tapped into place, the lugs will prevent the wash pipe from rotating during use. Next, install the metal snap ring after giving it a light coat of oil. And last comes the O-ring, which is inserted in its groove. Then the surface is lightly greased. Now, both the lower and upper packing assemblies are completed, and it's time to fit them back together. The lower gland nut slips over the lower packing housing once you've lightly oiled it. Then the upper gland nut is balanced on top, and the wash pipe is pushed into place. From this point on, installation is a simple process. Set the wash pipe in packing back on the threaded sleeve and tighten the upper gland nut and then the lower, and then tighten them up to final torque with your hammer. Retighten packing nuts after an hour of operation. Now, except for checking the mud shield to make sure it's not loose or damaged in any way, your business with the wash pipe and packing is done for the operating life of the packing rings, except for daily maintenance. That routine is easy as pie. You grease the wash pipe and packing after it's packed and once each tower. There is one simple thing to remember. If you try to grease it while the mud pumps are going, you're not going to have much luck. Why? Well, you remember when the pumps are on, the mud flowing through the wash pipe is under lots of pressure, and it tries to force its way up between the packing rings, wash pipe, and metal spacer. The pressure of the mud against the rubber packing rings pushes them tight against the metal spacers, and that's how your seal is formed. And try as hard as you like, you're not going to have much success getting grease to the packing rings while the mud pumps are exerting pressure against the packing. But when the pumps are turned off, as when the swivels in the rat hole, it's easy. Just give the packing a few shots with your grease gun once each tower. While you're at it, it's a good opportunity to do all the rest of your maintenance at the same time, such as greasing the bail pins and upper seals. Just like trying to grease the packing rings when the mud pumps are on, you won't have any luck if you try to grease the bail pins while all the weight of the swivel and drill string is hanging on the bail. All that weight will pull the bail right up against the pin in the wear area, so that grease cannot possibly lube the pin. If you'll grease it while the swivel's sitting in the rat hole, however, it'll work like a charm. There's another daily maintenance chore you must not forget: greasing the upper seals. As you can see in the cutaway, the seals are located directly beneath the upper bearing retainer, which is guarded from any mud which might escape from the wash pipe and packing by the mud shield. Now, your mud shield and upper oil seals are very important, because any mud which gets past these two stop guards will flow into the main oil reservoir and ruin your bearings. 4 shots of grease every tower will lubricate the rubber packing inside your oil seals and keep them from wearing out so fast. The upper metal sleeve, of course, is always turning, and unless you lube the upper seals regularly, the friction of that movement burns the packing faster than need be. Even more important, greasing the oil seals purges any mud which may have gotten under the mud shield and forces it back up and away from your main oil reservoir and bearings. Speaking of oil and bearings, if you don't check the oil level in your swivel daily, you might just as well throw in the towel. None of the rest of your maintenance will do you any good at all. The swivel has to be hanging straight, of course, so you get a true reading. If you can see or feel that the oil is up to the high level, you're in good shape. If we go back to our cutaway, you can see that there are 3 bearings, all of which depend on the oil which fills this body cavity to lubricate them. Let's see how each bearing works. The topmost bearing is called the upper hold-down bearing, or the upthrust bearing. That means if you hit a hard formation when drilling, this bearing absorbs most of the shock. and prevents the threaded sleeve from knocking the wash pipe and packing out of alignment. When Carl removes the bonnet, we can see how this works. These are shims. Shims keep a preset amount of clearance between the bearing and its race. Sometimes, however, there's too much clearance, and then the bearing begins to bounce up and down, tearing little holes in the rollers and the race. A sure sign that this is happening is when you begin to get excessive wash pipe and packing wear. If you have to replace the wash pipe and packing more often than usual, you can bet your bottom dollar that your upthrust bearing and main bearing have too much clearance and have begun to wobble. One way to check the clearance is with a magnetic base and dial indicator. The bearings are preloaded, so there should be no movement. If there is clearance, you'll get bearing wear. So rather than pay for a new upthrust or main bearing, it's a good idea to check clearance and alignment every 6 months. Now, if Carl will pull the sleeve, we can get a better look at the main bearing. The main bearing is comprised of an upper and lower race, and the tapered rollers in the center. Its function is to support 99% of the weight of the drill string and the downward thrust of this load on the swivel. If any mud or particles of sand were to get into the oil inside the swivel body, these rollers might last another 8 hours. The last bearing is the lower radial bearing, and its purpose is to keep the sleeve in alignment when the Kelly is turning. To make sure these bearings run in clean, clear oil, you should drain the swivel once every 90 days and refill it with clean oil. Can you remember these maintenance tips? Let's have one last quick review. Grease the bale pins, wash pipe and packing, and upper seals. Once a day at the same time you check the oil level. One last tip. If you'll replace the oil once every 90 days, your swivel will give you trouble-free service year after year.